Hey there, this is your pal Pally, and welcome back to Git Er Raid. Warlords of Draenor beta testing continues on with some more heroic mode bosses, namely 2 in 1. They are the twin Ogron, Pol, and Phemos. Unlike most dual bosses or council-style fights, these bosses do not share a health pool, so you do have to decide which one of these ugly mugs you want to take down first. There is much to this fight, and of course, as always, encounters can change from the time beta is conducted until it is live. The basic mechanics of this fight have to do with two things: the boss's energy bars and the distance the bosses are apart. The bosses will start with energy that is offset, at least it was in testing. Phemos had almost 100 energy to start, and Pol started with just a little energy. This guaranteed some things would happen on the Pol, and their abilities would be offset to start. We'll get more into that as we describe their individual mechanics, but for now, just know that whenever one of the Ogron reaches 33 energy, they will do a special weapon attack. When they reach 66 energy, they will do some kind of shout attack. And then at 100 energy, they will do a big AoE type raid attack. The other big mechanic to note is that as you drag the Ogron apart from each other, they will receive a haste boost, allowing their casting time to decrease and reduce the amount of time you have to react to things. So for the most part, you want the twins to be together. That's not always possible, as you'll see soon, but this sort of prevents you from just separating them the entire fight. So back to their energy attacks. Let's go through those, and then talk about sequencing and strategy. Pol's weapon attack is fairly simple. He will basically charge someone who is a distant target. If you are hit with him charging, you'll be knocked back and take a chunk of damage. For the most part, he telegraphs this so you can avoid it. I even think that the target of the charge can avoid it too. Pol's shout is fairly simple. He will just do an interrupting shout, which does some light damage and interrupts any spell casting for 6 seconds. Probably want to not be casting anything before he does this at 66 energy. Lastly, Pol's AoE move is to pulverize the ground 3 times. The pulverizes are different and go out in this kind of sequence. First, he'll do a light bit of damage to everyone and in an area 3 yards around players. Just can't be all stacked on each other, or this will smack your raid around. Then his second pulverize drops some of the ceiling down in an 8-yard area around some of your raid members. Again, you should be able to avoid this as a graphic precedes it on the ground for the most part. Lastly, he'll do a big pulverize that hits the whole raid for some decent damage that will do less the further away you are from the center of it. Try to be out of this one for sure. That's it for Pol. Next up we'll do Phemos. His weapon attack is a fairly simple whirlwind, but pay attention to this one as it has a tank type mechanic built into it. We'll go over it more when talking about the other tank debuffs. But for now, just don't get hit by the big old whirlwind. Phemos' shout is interesting and called Enfeebling Roar. This does some damage, but more interestingly, it will give everyone hit by it within 20 yards a debuff. It will increase your damage taken for a period of time. And I can't give you specific numbers because the debuff's intensity and duration are all calculated by how many people got hit by it. So you'll see me get hit with it and have a 31-second debuff that increases my damage taken by 31%. It basically splits a 300% debuff with 300-second duration to everyone hit. Finally, Phemos' raid-wide move is one that will keep you on your toes. It's called Quake and will do some light damage for a while, but more importantly, he'll throw some weapons down and fire waves will spawn from these weapons. They'll move and twist and cross, and you'll find it hard to avoid. For the most part, don't stand in fire applies here. If you get into the fire, it will give you a stacking dot that hurts a little, maybe 10 to 12k a tick for a few stacks. That's not too bad, but it's all avoidable, so do your best. So that's it for the big mechanics, but let's talk tanks for a bit. Both bosses have a big tank hit that they'll do periodically. Pol does a shield bash that has some arcane damage added on top. Phemos does a double slash that will inflict an arcane dot on the tank that stacks, although both of these mechanics seem to not be working on these Pols. What's more interesting is that Whirlwind that Famous does increases damage taken from Shield Bash by 10% per stack. This can get up there quickly and kind of seems like it doesn't allow you to tank swap right after a Whirlwind. So work this out, tanks. I was unfortunately ranged for this fight and didn't get a chance to see how it worked out specifically for tanks. It looked like our tanks would taunt off right as the quake was happening, but it may work out that a tank swap isn't even necessary. Alrighty, so now on to strategy. This is all about stacking, spreading, and avoiding fire or not avoiding fire? So let's deal with that last confusing bit I said there first. The placement of the fire from the quake weapons was a first bit that many guilds figured out. You can make the boss throw the weapons in front and behind him against a wall and avoid much of the damage here. If you don't mess up with something like that, other guilds found that the damage from the fire to be light enough to just stack and heal through. And finally, if you don't want to use a Hunter's Awesome Raid CD like Aspect of the Fox, you can also just do the old don't stand in fire routine and avoid as much of it as possible. In fact, the fight starts off with Quake being immediately cast, so you'll have to deal with at least one set of weapons shooting out fire. The group I ran with settled on mostly avoiding the lines, but not making it a huge priority. With some raid CDs, it's probably a decent strategy. From there, it's sort of a stack spread type thing going on. You'll get a charge from Pole, and you can bait this if you want with a range, but it's not a bad deal to have the Famous tank drag him away for a little bit right before Whirlwind and bait the charge. Whirlwind is obviously something you either spread away from or drag the boss away from. Remember that it will give the tank a debuff taking more damage from Pole, so be careful the Pole tank doesn't get hit. Next, you'll have the Interrupting Shout, and then the Enfeebling Roar. It seems like most groups would stack as many people in for the roar as they could, unless they cheated it with a smoke bomb. Smoke bomb prevented it from even working at all, so likely will get fixed before this one goes live. Immediately after Enfeebling Roar, you should spread out so that the first bit of Pulverize doesn't splash to others. Then it's a matter of staying spread for the second Pulverizes, and then running away from the center of the third. After that, this fight is rinse and repeat. There seemed to be a bit of weirdness with the way energy gains happened here too. The second time through all of the abilities, they would start to overlap a bit more, requiring you to react faster. Raid groups that got further in the fight reported that this energy gain evened out and sort of went back to the cadence of the first cycle of abilities. Again, we'll see how that turns out on live, but you could get some nasty Pulverize plus Quake combos that would require some serious fire dodging and spreading out, plus even some raid CDs. As I noted in the intro, the bosses do not share a health pool. That seems to be intended, because if you kill one of them off, the other gains a large enrage buff. For many guilds, it didn't seem to prevent them from focusing down one or the other, and then just plowing through until the end. The health of the bosses was also intentionally very large for this test. Guilds reported killing them after 12 plus minutes in. It's likely going to be a lot shorter than that when it hits live. That's about all for this guide on Twin Ogron. Tanks move Famous in and out for Whirlwind, and see if you can put the Quake weapons on the wall. Healers, watch for the Interrupting Shout, and do your best to heal through the Quake Fire and Pulverizes. DPS, avoid fire, and split the debuff from Enfeebling Roar while stacking and spreading a whole bunch. As always, please comment, like, and subscribe to the video if you found it helpful, and have a good one!